So we had a number of good questions, and I've taken the liberty of trying to group these questions and pose them as one question to our co-chairs and to Deb Atwood here. So one set of questions are the potential conflict between meeting future demand and improving water or the environmental footprint. Someone said, every time I talk to a Midwestern farmer, he or she says, I can't improve water, we've got to feed 9 billion people. And we had a related question about why people didn't hear more about biotech this morning as a solution to feeding the world. Where's agree on that? Do we agree about biotech as a solution or not? So you want to start, Dan, and then we'll throw it to Gary?
It's a very important question. I think it was John Maynard Keynes who said, for every complicated problem, there is a simple and a wrong solution. And there's probably nowhere more true than the area of agriculture. We have to, in my judgment, we have to pursue many strategies when it comes to feeding a growing world on using less water and less land. The strategies are going to be different in the developing world than they are in the developed world. The strategies are going to require new technologies, including biotechnology. The strategies are also going to cause using existing technologies and just better farming practices. We can increase yields in Africa and in the developing world in many cases by using simple techniques like better application of fertilizers, better water conservation, and by better training, better post-harvest storage, a lot of things that don't require new technologies. But at least in my judgment, based upon what I've seen, I don't think you can make a quantum leap if you're talking about 9 billion people and you're talking about huge increases in standards of living in Indonesia and India and China without embracing new technologies, including biotechnology. And we've been doing similar things for the last 400 years in this country. Not all the technical biotechnology what we're doing now, but we've been doing plant breeding. And I mean, we haven't been afraid of new technologies, and in many cases, agriculture has led the world in it. What we have to make sure is that we have good science behind all these things to make sure that safety is a key priority. I recall when I was in the administration, I raised some questions about biotech. Karen remembers those, and I thought I was going to get fired because I raised questions, and because it wasn't so-called the party line. I wasn't, frankly, I didn't know enough about it, so I was just asking questions about it. And I think questions of safety, that's certainly one area. Efficacy, ownership, a variety of issues involving competition. Those are really important issues that we have to address. But I don't think that we're going to be able to meet the ultimate threats of what's going to face the human race without going down this road. Let's take the issue of water and water utilization, which is paramount. We have yet to use biotechnology to really hit this issue of less utilization of water. There's been, in some circles, there's been some improvement, but I haven't seen very much yet. And maybe it's out there, but maybe we're on the cusp of doing that. But we have all these challenges about overutilization of soil and overutilization of water and these terrible conservation challenges, which can in part be dealt with new technologies, including biotechnology. And we should not be afraid to go down these roads. It would be nice, sooner rather than later, if we could get quantifiable data on the metrics and value of these technologies. So we're just not shooting in the dark and accusing each other of names if we support it or don't support these kinds of things, which is kind of happened in the past. So I would say I'm not agnostic about it. I'm a supporter of it, but I think that it's the old Reagan line: trust but verify. We must make sure that these things are working and they're effective and their safety that's properly built into the thing. And it's not the only solution to our problem. I'm sorry I talked too long on that.
No, it's I mean, I want to pick right up there. I mentioned earlier, been in business now for 30 years. There's always been this polarity, just even bigger than agriculture, between business, profits, and environment. And it's only because we've never factored externalities into, we've never priced externalities. When we price it, and Pat, I mean, farmers understand this, you lose topsoil, you're losing your equity. You pollute or you deplete your water table, you're undermining your operation. And in my work, we see all over the world examples, because I buy 140 different commodities, we see examples all over the world where that conflict is in the mind. It's not in reality. Brazil, organic sugar, 60,000 acres, 10% higher yields than when they were non-organic. Water table has elevated and improved. Carbon content in the topsoils is up, equal now to the native forests that were there when they came in and plowed under the trees originally, and 312 species have returned. So you've got a fully integrated ecological, what do you call it, agri-landscape, an ecological landscape AG was talking about. Water, we have had this notion that the earth is a subsidiary of our economics, and I think we're starting to understand now the price tag is getting high here. That's a dead end. It's a cul-de-sac. I think we can come out of it. So I see examples in Israel, in China, in Chile, across the U.S., in New Hampshire, and in Central Valley, California, with farmers who are improving topsoils and improving water conservation through more systemic thinking by putting carbon into the soil, which then retains moisture, so you lose less to transpiration. So, and regarding biotech, I couldn't agree more with Dan's last point. Look, I mean, to say you're against biotech is like saying you're against science or against breathing or something. I mean, technology is going to be a part of the mix. And I say this as someone for whom my category prohibits genetically engineered foods. I understand, but I'm not anti-GMO. It's just that I concur with Dan. Let's get the evidence. Let's get the proof. Let's see what's really happening. Unfortunately, the talk-do ratio is pretty high here in some circles. There are a lot of claims, and you'll see it in this bioeconomy report in the executive summary that just came out 2 days ago. You see a rehash of claims that were made in the 1990s that have yet to be proven, verified. And I'm not saying that they won't be, but higher intrinsic yields have not been proven yet. Decreased water on a systemic basis, water use has not been proven yet. But the one thing that has been proven that's a concern, not just for me, but for a coalition of 550 diversified groups ranging from conventional to organic farmers, from the religious right to health workers, is that accompanying these technologies in the early generation here, since herbicide tolerance, I mentioned this earlier, has been one of the critical traits bred in, accompanying these, and no one in biotech disputes this, this is a quote unquote a management repercussion, is that we have seen a dramatic uptake in the amount of herbicides being used. We've now got a weed resistance problem that weed scientists across the land-grant spectrum are recognizing. You've got an organization called Save Our Crops who are pro-biotech. They're not organic, who are opposed to this new GMO corn, this new 2,4-D corn, because it's seen as putting gasoline on a fire, and that we're just going too far. So again, should we be for or against biotech? That's an academic and a silly discussion. I think what we need to be we need to be evidence-based. We need to be documenting. We need to be looking at real inputs, real outputs, setting up parallel trials, and certainly not putting all of our eggs in any one basket, as has been, I think, amply demonstrated by both panels today.
And Emmy, what do you?
Let me just add a word on the meeting future demand part of that question. As we've emphasized, we're looking forward to, by 2050, a population of well over 9 billion people in the world. Obviously, some increase in supply is going to be needed. The numbers are everywhere from 50 to 100% more than now. But in fact, there is also the observation that all of that food, all of that increase is not going to be produced in the United States. That simply is not a reality. And the question is, where should that food be produced? And the answer comes from the observation that most food that people consume is actually produced in their own areas, in their own countries. So obviously, for the US to kind of embrace that challenge, for AGREE to embrace that challenge of meeting the demand for food of 9 billion people, it means that we also need to direct attention to the capacity of people in developing countries who will be the demand for that food, because that's where population, the demographics are indicating that the people are going to be, not in the US. That means that we have to really focus on international agriculture. And this gets I just want to make a couple of, two comments quick on international agriculture. Africa, sub-Saharan African farmers have largely been practicing organic agriculture ever since, and it's failing them. So clearly something else needs to be done, either the greater management investment, the greater input investment that Judith talked about may need to be made. But again, how is that going to be made? But better technology is clearly one element of that solution. And I don't think it can be ruled out that genetically modified organisms might be part of that solution, but it's not the only part of that solution. So I think Gary's point about there's no need to be categorical at this point, but there is a need to apply good science and to look at the results that one wants to accomplish.
If I could just say one other thing about AGREE in this context too. And by the way, AG Organics was failing AG 15 years ago, a dozen years ago, and it's not today. I mean, there's a technology and an information aspect. In an hour and a half, there will be, or 2 hours, there will be a press conference in California announcing that 850,000 signatures have been gathered for to put labeling of GM foods on the fall elections. This is a victory for transparency and for consumers' right to know, and speaks to everything here that we've been talking about. However, I guarantee you're going to hear voices who are going to be taking advantage of this to say this is an anti-Monsanto or anti-Dow or whatever. I think it's pretty well known. I'm chairing a national effort that we're working with the FDA on labeling, seeking the same rights that citizens in 40 other nations have, including really progressive countries like Russia and China. But we are not. This is not an anti any corporation or anti this technology. This is the same rights that we have with irradiated foods or with orange juice from concentrators, saying, look, we have new processes in the 21st century, and citizens have a right to know. AGREE, and I just need to say a little advertisement for us here. We are aggressively focused on not allowing that kind of partisan dispute to be. That's got to end. There will be voices, and people will associate me this afternoon, I'm sure, with those voices. I am not just speaking for myself here. I'm speaking for AGREE. That is the politics of racing to the bottom. Okay. This can't be one side against another. This has to be all of us working together to find new solutions. So evidence-based and not all the eggs in one basket. But this is not an anti, this is a pro. The more transparency we have, the more excitement we have, the more enthusiasm, the more participation, the more young people, et cetera.
One time I was given this talk in Wichita, and a guy asked me a question about biotech, and he had a hairline like me and Bob Thompson back there, and he said, you know, if you could have a biotech crop that would grow hair, would you be that much opposed to the technology? And I said, absolutely not. My point in all of this is that as part of this effort in working, that's why we have industry as part of the discussion and the advisory group and everything else. You know, we do need their voices in this because, you know, for example, I take a couple of drugs that are biotech pharmaceutical drugs. I pour them down my throat every day. I don't ask whether there's going to be some transformational thing out there in the world. I want to keep my cholesterol down and my blood pressure down.
Or if you're diabetic.
Or you're diabetic, you will take, that's probably the bigger, or in the cancer medication area. So that stuff tends to get general public support. Why? Because they see there is a benefit to them. And the benefit to them outweighs there may be potential harm. After all, you may be frying your liver if you take Lipitor every single day of your life, but you've got to figure out that, it's probably going to be better for you if you go down this kind of thing. That's a very cosmic quote I just gave you. But I guess one of the things we have to do in this world, as we look at the panoply of different ways to address feeding a hungry world and doing it with good nutrition and everything else, is to recognize that the public's not stupid in all this stuff. They'll be a lot more supportive of these new technologies if they feel that there is some common good associated with them. And that's something that I think we can all work on together as well. Okay, that's enough of that.
Yeah, I just have a very short comment. This is what I live with every day. So just, so you know, I've gotten a degree in group therapy, psychotherapy. It's excellent. I love it.
So we had a couple of questions from you all about health, and one thing I want to do is pose the question to Emmy about this. Have you talk a little bit more, someone asked, about the linkage between nutrition and health, and the distinction between, if there is one, that linkage here in the U.S. and overseas in developing countries. And then there are a couple broader questions about where is AGREE and the public health establishment and the health industry. And so if we can sort of deal with those separately, or, sequentially.
Good. Thanks for giving me the opening on the first one, because it seems to me that it's important to kind of get out there that conceptually, agriculture is essential to the production of food. Food is essential to the establishment of good nutritional status, and good nutritional status is essential to good health, right? Everybody agrees on that sequence. We also can probably agree that for the farming population, good health is actually critical to the ability to farm, and especially where I've been working a lot in Africa, where people still use hand tools. If they're not healthy, physically healthy, they're not going to be able to get that cycle of ag, food, nutrition, and health going. But when you look at it practically, and this comes as a 30-year bureaucrat, in fact, there are great big gaps between each of those four elements. Agriculture may produce food, but it may produce fuel, it may produce fiber. Well, it's not quite so clear, okay? Food may produce nutrition, but, well, it may produce other things as well. It may produce income for companies, it may produce processing opportunities, et cetera. Each of those segments of that conceptually integrated chain becomes divided into specialized, professionalized, marketized linkages or segments that are not carefully linked with each other. And what has to happen is that consumers need to make that choice. Consumers need to understand sort of what's in agriculture, what goes into food, what kind of food will provide good nutrition, and what kind of nutrient intake is going to provide them good health. And often, as Gary just said, consumers don't even have the information to be able to make that choice. So we have the health sector saying, well, gosh, people aren't consuming enough commodities that are high in vitamin A, so it's just a lot easier to give kids vitamin A tablets. It just avoids all that messy linkage with trying to persuade moms that they need to select foods which provide their kids the adequate nutrition through diversity of diet. And so we've discovered that in the AGREE discussions that in fact the health community and the nutrition community and the food community actually sit in different corners of the room and hardly have a discussion, even when you get into the science side. Fortunately, our research committee has really taken this on with a vengeance, and we've really begun to have that conversation about the extent to which science, in fact, enables consumers to make good food choices that lead to good nutrition and to have the information that actually leads to health status. One of the principles of AGREE is to focus on prevention. As I just gave the vitamin A example, often we hear the medical community focusing on cures. Forget the prevention. And I think that this is an area of challenge that we all need to sort of move forward on. So the ag, health, nutrition, ag, food, health, nutrition, health, got it in the right order. Linkage issue, I think, is one that's just a consistent underpinning for the entire AGRI discussion. In developing countries, somebody made the point that supply is really an issue and access is really an issue, but choice, availability, seasonality, the diversity of diet, the quality of diet, the foodborne illnesses, all of those are all issues that need to be addressed as well. So this is a humongous challenge that we have in front of us. What was the second part of your question?
It was about the public health system and the health industry and how AGRI proposes to interact with
Right.
that realm.
And again, I'll just make a quick comment and then turn it over to others, because in my career in USAID, it was virtually impossible for the agriculture folks to have a conversation with the health folks that actually went anywhere. And the nutrition people since the early 90s have really very much focused on micronutrients and using vitamin A treatments and so forth. Iron, providing iron pills, zinc pills. I mean, pills are good, you know. It's much easier. You can control it. That whole situation, that whole outlook has really changed in the international development community, in the development assistance community in the last 4 or 5 years. And there has been a renewed effort to sort of make that link between agriculture, food, nutrition, and health in a way that I have not seen in over 30 years. The food-based approach to nutrition, which was a phrase that many of us in the agriculture community were trying to use in order to reestablish that link between nutrition and health. I used to get laughed out of the room when I used that expression. People said, oh, that's so old-fashioned, you know? That expression is back, and people are discussing food-based approaches to nutrition. They're discussing dietary diversity. They're discussing nutrition-sensitive value chains. So I think there's an opening here that is unique, that's new, and that we can push forward on. And I do have to give credit to USAID and its administrator right now for some of the leadership that's being exercised on the effort to link agriculture, food, and nutrition. Obviously, Raj Shah was a doctor himself, came out of the health side of the Gates Foundation work, and now, and in his role as administrator at USAID, is putting tremendous pressure on the agency to begin to sort of link the agriculture, food, and health agendas with nutrition as kind of the connective tissue between them. Feed the Future, which is an initiative I think many of you have heard about, is literally walking on two feet, one on the food and agriculture side and one on food and nutrition side, with many of the indicators having to do with improved health status. And I think this is an opening and an initiative which is long overdue, but I think likely to move ahead. It's getting a lot of traction in developing countries. The 1,000 Days campaign focusing on the nutrition of children under the age of 2 is bringing the medical community into the conversation about consumption and nutrition in a way, again, that I haven't seen in a long time. So I think we're at a good point. I think AGRI is at a timely point here to make this long linkage and make it real in terms of practice. That said, the conversation is still difficult. The health people are there, the nutrition people are there, and the food people are there.
Well, I just want to say quickly, I agree with all of that. I mean, this is the time. This is what we were talking about earlier. We can't be siloed. This is not just agriculture. This is food. This is not just agriculture and food. This is health. I just make 2 quick points. I mean, one, I mentioned earlier, I wear the hat of a business person. So it's the consumer who pays my salary and my employees' salaries and who I'm accountable to every day. And indeed, the organic industry, my business, and the whole sector, I double-checked my numbers, by the way. I was off by $1 billion. It's $31 billion in 2011, not 30. But we exist because the consumers are wanting to make this link. Because
Right.
the number 1 and 2 reasons that people go to organic are having children and having a health event somewhere in their lives or their families. So this is absolutely a growth trend. As I mentioned earlier, it's grown double digits right through the recession. And that's with a high premium. So there's something going on out there. And ultimately, as Dan said earlier, this is all about the consumer. The other point I would make very quickly is that I think it's important, as we take Emmy's point seriously, that we understand that we now in 2012, we need to have the humility of our past sort of short, single solution, simple solutions that really created other problems. We need to recognize, we need to broaden health beyond nutrition. Health is about inputs. 1 in 3 children born today, right now after 2000, are going to be a type 2 diabetic. We didn't even have the name type 2 diabetes when I was a kid. We called it adult onset diabetes because kids didn't get it. Now it's 1 in 3, it's 1 in 2 if you're African American or Hispanic. The world has changed. We've got to broaden. This is about nutrition, but it's about it's about quality, it's about freshness, it's about omega-3s, it's about a variety of other considerations that haven't been traditionally part of nutrition science. And of course, it's also about inputs, as I mentioned before. Chuck mentioned a couple of studies out this summer, 2 in particular on pesticides. We now know, it was in pediatrics in July, there's a direct linkage between ADHD diagnoses and exposure to pesticides under 3 years old. How many of us see, this epidemic of ADHD diagnoses? I'm on the board of a kids camp. The nurse says that after the parents drop off the kids, they then line up at the infirmary now to drop off the drugs at levels they never saw before when they were. We also are now seeing new studies out linking pesticide exposures under 3 to 6 years old to even IQ development. I mean, this then becomes national security, right? I mean, this is so I think we have to. I think we're committed, obviously, to trying to bring those silos, de-silo the conversation, but also to recognizing that this is broader than just nutrition.
I'd say that I agree with that, but I will have to tell you, how many of you watch TV news that you totally disagree with? Probably rarely. There's the MSNBC crowd. There's the Fox crowd. There's the CNN crowd. I'm gonna bet you that that people tend to go down the road of what their pre-existing interest is. One of the things we really have to be careful in this whole discussion is that we just don't live in a world where we're getting reinforced from our previously held beliefs, because many times we're wrong. Science changes, and one of the things that I think this group agree can do is keep our mind open to that process. I had a guy who was a lobbyist here in town. I once made this comment about there's certain foods that are bad. He wrote me a note. He says, that's not true. There are no bad foods. I wrote him back and I said, we must live in different worlds. There are bad foods. I eat some of them sometimes. I had 2 Milky Ways yesterday. My God, I confess. Probably not a balanced diet, because I made the choice to do that kind of thing. But there are foods that are not so good for you, and other foods that you should eat, and we have freedom of choice in this world, and that's nice that we do that kind of thing. But what worries me a little bit, and this is where Agree comes in, with modern science, we're going to be able to pinpoint to not to a billionth, but to a trillionth or to a quadrillionth contaminated materials, things that are not necessarily good for you. And then we're going to have to make choices as a society. Can we operate as a civic society where we know everything down to the specific, and especially when we're watching and reading only the things that reinforce our own views? That's tough. This is more cosmic, as Deb says. I'd like to talk about these things that probably nobody even thinks about for all their lives, but it does impact how we look at these issues as well, in terms of understanding that it is a complicated world, and there are some solutions that are generally in the right direction, but they could change tomorrow afternoon too with modern science. And we just have to make sure we have a nuanced view of what this world looks like. One final thing, and Emmy would know this. We had a hell of a time getting anybody interested in hunger and famine and nutrition in Africa, except to provide food aid, because all the money was going into AIDS. All of it was going into AIDS. And then finally somebody realized the old expression, when a doctor says take your medicine with food, it actually might have some positive impact to it. Now we're seeing there's a revolutionary change. so that not 95% of the money in East Africa was going into just AIDS relief. It was going to a comprehensive health solution that affected AIDS as well as food and everything else. I only mention that because that well-meaning people need to really be thinking about these issues holistically as well.
By the way,
So-
there's more sugar in some of my competitors' yogurts than in a Milky Way. So, so we need to read labels.
We're just bad people.
So I'm going to bring us back down again.
Yeah,
Chuck
or-
Abbott of Reuters wants to know, we're talking about future farm bills, but what does AGREE want to do? What are we aiming for in this 2012 farm bill?
Well, I think it's going to, I mean, look, a lot of groups are trying to influence this farm bill. And I think there's been, for example, in the whole area of, in the area of influencing America's, the way we deal with food aid around the world, there's some very positive steps being made in this farm bill. And there's some discussion on organics and research, and the risk management stuff is good, actually. We're moving into that. I don't sense that we're going to have an active advocacy role in this next farm bill, unless it gets put off, which could happen, you know. And I don't have any, if anybody here has any ideas about whether we're going to get a bill done this summer. This, you know, I'm looking at my expert back there who's shaking his head no. You know, but I do think the debate can help the Congress as it deals with these issues on a larger picture. But I don't know. I suspect it's going to be difficult. We've got the House now that's going to act, and we don't know what's going to happen floor action on the Senate side on any of these provisions, and they have all these budget issues to deal with. But it can't hurt. The discussion can't hurt as they deal with these issues.
I don't think there's any chance of us having any impact on this farm bill, but I think what I hope might come out of this process is some sense that differing points of view can actually sit at the table and talk, that we can model a different kind of behavior that every citizen in this country knows is not currently working.
And I just have to mention this one thing. I watched the C-SPAN, the markup of the Senate Farm Bill. I watched it yesterday. Senators Stabenow, Roberts, Baucus, all the group there. And I recognize that agriculture policy is different than so many others. But you know, they actually sat there and talked to each other without killing each other. Mm-hmm. They actually talked about substantive issues without engaging in ad hominem name calls. I mean, granted, I mean, agriculture is a little different, and the program where they were talking about benefits.
They're all getting stuff.
They are, but it was in the context of a budget reduction effort, too. And I just thought to myself, why was that? And I said, for one thing, by and large in agriculture, there is a kind of sense of the common good in agriculture. And I'm not sure you necessarily have seen that in the whole legislative process. It was just an interesting observation I made.
Deb?
Yeah, and just a comment about, you know, the Farm Bill. You know, lessons will be taken from this Farm Bill. We just hope that our priority issues are part of the debate, and so far they have been touched upon as the bill is being considered. We're taking, you know, this was set up for an 8-year process, and we're looking at other laws and policies too. Environment, you know, immigration, tax, budget, foreign assistance. So, yes, the Farm Bill's important, but we're also looking to other policy platforms.
So I have two other sort of questions that represent groups of questions. One is, several people asked what AGREE thinks about and is going to do about regional food systems and diverse food systems. Where is that? Isn't that, if you're talking about system change, hey, AGREE, isn't that important? And the last question, I'll throw these both out so you can pick and choose, guys, is more specificity about how AGREE is going to look at R&D changes. And one questioner asked about the role of non-land grants in the research process. Another asked about whose science and evidence is AGREE looking at. There's a lot of science and evidence out there on the table. So I throw those two separate issues out, regional food systems as a way to see systemic change in the sector, and how we're going to go about the R&D modernization or reprioritization. Don't all jump at
I
once
was
like
gonna-
usual.
Well, I think part of our challenge, to be honest, and
Yeah.
Deb can speak to this probably better, or Todd, as I said earlier, we're just getting started. And this isn't a deferral or a deflection, but we can each speak as individuals. But I would say that there is not agreement yet on a lot of these. There's agreement on what we're going to talk about and how we're going to talk. And by the way, that's meaningful. That's an achievement. How often does that happen in this town? It doesn't happen in my state legislature. It doesn't happen in a lot of places now. So I need to, I think, put this in the proper perspective, and I don't think we should apologize for it. This is meaningful stuff. Dan at one point, stood up and said, "My God, we're talking about everything here," and it's sort of true, because when you start pulling the thread, all of the American economy ultimately is tied to a lot of what we're talking about here, and the world economy. So I would just say very simply, regional food systems, because we are focused on resource limitations that are now real, in evidence. We don't have to dispute that. Inevitably, food miles or taking more regionally appropriate strategies is going to have to be a part of the mix. I don't think anybody in the Agree family would dispute that. On the how R&D, that's exactly the work ahead. I don't think any of us could prescribe how that's going to go. But I can tell you it's going to be very interesting conversations. You got a sense of that with the second panel.
I do think that we are going to convene some groups and panels to look at the R&D side, the role of our land grants, the role of non-land grants. What kind of work are they doing? How much duplication is there? Did the earmark process mean that we have a lot of the same work being done at various land grants around the country? Do we need all that stuff or not? And even if, it's a little presumptuous to say we're going to try to change that overnight, because that may not be possible. And it then is the agriculture research infrastructure focusing enough of its time and effort on what do they call these very large challenges, like water shortages, water quality, soil issues, and increased productivity, and then the relationship between private and public research, which is the heart of great changes historically in American agriculture has occurred in public research. We have a different environment now. There are different players in the situation. But I think those are issues that we're going to try to convene people to see if we can get some answers to that.
And I might add, well, first of all, you've all taken on the different challenges and priorities to work on them. And we will be convening on all 5 of our priorities this year and early next year. And we will be seeking input and examining what's working, what's not working, what's missing, and what's inspiring, I guess, are the sections. And we will be engaging probably a lot of you in this room as we do the convenings and co-convenings around labor, nutrition, research, nutrition, environment.
Can I just make a comment about the regional and diverse systems thing? Because I think really this is very much at the heart of a lot of the discussion. And from an international perspective, I believe that there's some concern that the U.S. policy has been overly focused on a couple of major staple grain crops. And you've heard that from our technical advisory team saying there's a lot of low-hanging fruit out there in the horticultural sector, for example. And that the second step is that perspective on sort of major staple grain crops as kind of the heart of productivity has actually been applied in terms of thinking about how the foreign assistance programs work as well. Again, focusing on the major staple grains that are produced, wheat, rice, corn. Whereas again, I come from a background in Africa where in fact corn, rice, and wheat are not necessarily the major staples. Corn pretty much is in East and Central Africa, Southern Africa. But in Western Africa, roots, tubers, Eastern Africa, bananas, plantains are really major staple crops. And research for those crops has been absolutely non-existent. Horticultural crops are not even part of the CGIAR the Consultative Group on International Ag Research. So there's no research internationally and globally going on with regard to horticultural crops. Similarly, animals, obviously as incomes rise, animal protein, animal products become very much more an important part of the diet. Again, globally, the research, the publicly funded research on animal source foods is, well, it's not nil, but it's very, very small. And yet, this is one of the fastest growing areas. I am happy to say that the CGIAR, the Consultative Group on International Ag Research, has put together a research program which actually brings together meat and fish in the same framework, looking at the sustainable production of meat and fish to meet protein needs in the developing world. But for a long time, it has not been a diverse set of crops that have been looked at and supported globally. It's been the major staples. So I think now, again, we're at the brink of considering more diverse systems, more regionally adapted, and bringing in a focus on crops that we don't necessarily consume here in the US, but that are critical for the nutrition and health of the developing world going forward and meeting the food demand for the 9 billion.
So I'm going to call it the end here. Thank you so much for your attendance and for your questions. And I think the co-chairs and Deb and the advisory committee members will be here to talk to you one-on-one should people have other issues. Thanks very much.